For more on this, I'm joined here in the studio by CEO of the National Farmers Federation, Tony Mahar. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
Why don't we start with the rain the other day? I'm sure a lot of Australians are interested in how the country's doing. I know it's far from one area, but how much did it help?
Look, it was really welcomed. It helped a great deal for some farmers. I mean, some farmers had, in the old language, 2 inches, so and some had more. So incredibly welcomed and helped a lot. But there were some farmers that missed out and got 2 or 3 mils and things like that. So it certainly hasn't broken the drought. It's been really welcome for those that got it. What we need now is follow-up rain and more of it. So
and sort of slow, sustained rain needs to really settle in some of these areas.
Yeah, over the weekend, like it did in some places. Sit there for a day or so and just continue to drizzle away. That's what people are looking for, because it has been so dry. And so if there did happen to be a sudden downpour and you got sort of 3 or 4 inches or something, the risk would be that a lot of the soil, there'd be a lot of erosion and things like that. So it's quite tricky to get the right amount.
Queensland not so long ago.
Yeah.
Oh well, we hope to see more farmers dancing in their briefs and celebrating in the next few weeks. We've got in the meantime this latest response from the government. What's your take on it?
Look, it's drought policy. We've always said is a really difficult policy area, and anyone that says different is selling something. It's difficult, right? So this latest commitment from the government is sizable and significant, and it will be welcomed by those that need those things like low or no interest loans. Children education expenses. This is about keeping farmers food on the table, keeping their wellbeing and their welfare as good as it possibly can.
And the whole family going.
Yeah, that's right. And so, we've been talking about rate relief and payroll taxes. We need the states and Commonwealth to cooperate on this. And there was some evidence of that with South Australia with the 100 gigalitres.
Yeah, but on that rate relief, so this was one hope that the federal government would provide a subsidy here, and the federal government saying this is a state responsibility. Is that fair enough?
I think it is. I mean, we know that we live in a federated world. And
the states have got responsibilities
and for payroll taxes. So, I mean, states have got constituents clearly, so they need to listen to their constituents and collaborate with the Commonwealth.
So is that your call now? The states really need to step up here?
Yeah, they need to cooperate. We've said that from day one, is that Commonwealth and states need to work together. The drought doesn't stop at state borders.
But is it right now on this particular issue, is it not so much cooperation, but the states need to come with money on the rate relief issue?
Of course they do. The rate relief will help farmers' cash flow, day-to-day expenses. So we've got some hopefully some relief from the Commonwealth in terms of school fees with the $15 million that was announced today. That will help some people with a day-to-day expense, school fees. They're a classic expense that a lot of people face. Rates are the other thing. Everyone has to pay rates. So if the states can help out with that, they'll be helping farming constituents.
And the councils can't do without the money, presumably, right now, because they're in trouble as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's about the state, not the council.
Of course, compounding. So.
Big part of the announcement is these concessional loans. Importantly, this goes out to dependent businesses, not just farms. When this works in practice, is there a concern that there's still this debt balloon sitting at the end of it, or do you back farmers to be able to, over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there'll be a good season in that time and they'll be able to get back on their feet?
Look, certainly that's the principle, and the low or no, in fact no interest loans for 2 years and low interest only for 3 to 5 years, and then following that principal and interest is a good thing. Farmers this drought will break. And farmers will come back, hopefully bigger and better and stronger, and they'll be able to pay those loans back. Of course, we don't want people to be saddled with unnecessary drought if they don't need to be. These, again, are options and that people can take up should they feel the need and should they have the capacity to pay those back.
The farm household allowance area, so the situation we're in is farmers can still be kicked off the payment, or whatever you want to call it. But at the moment, there can be this 6-month lump sum each 6 months, as long as it's in a drought area. It's what the Minister was telling us earlier, and that gets sorted out through the department and so on. Yep. Does that work well? Is that satisfactory?
Look, I think with farm household allowance, 2 things. It was never designed to be on forever.
No.
There has to be.
You want a farm that can make money most years.
That's right. And the second point is that, I'm yet to meet a farmer that wants to be on the arrangements. They would like to get off those arrangements as soon as they possibly can. So, I mean, those two principles are pretty firm and pretty strong. So, yes, we need to keep people, sustainable through this difficult, devastating time, and I think the government's committed to doing that. But no one wants to be on these arrangements, and they're not designed to be on forever anyway.
Is that the way that system will work? So rather than getting regular ones but 6-month lump payments, is that sort of satisfactory the way that actually works itself in the system? Is there a sort of Damocles hanging over one's head, or do you think that's okay to work that way?
Well, I think it's a safety net, right? So, and that's what it's designed to be, to keep food on the table and to keep families, together and, as I say, sustainable.
So, and each 6 months, if that drought hasn't broken, they can extend it.
Then the government's committed to doing that, so which I think is, entirely reasonable.
The interesting part of the announcement today: 100 gigalitres to be released down the Murray. So this is water that's going down there anyway, but normally would have been reserved for Adelaide for drinking water and so on, now can be used by farmers. Is that your understanding?
Look, what I understand, Tom, is that it's actually water that is going to be produced or delivered via the desalinisation plant in South Australia. So they produce
that's used for Adelaide, and then the farmers can use the stuff that was designated for.
Well, so either 140 or 120 gigalitres. 20 of that is for Adelaide use, and 100 gigalitres is going to be put into the system, so you could work out where the accounting is, whether it's transferred or not, or it's just substituted for water that's coming down the river. At the end of the day, this is the sentiment around this is keeping breeding stock alive and viable for when this drought breaks, because we want to be able to, the livestock producers in this instance, want to be able to spring back as quickly as they can once this drought breaks.
And this doesn't affect environmental flows, right? So
no.
It seems like a very sort of neat, I know it's not a solution, but there's no losers in it apart from the cost. Why isn't this considered earlier?
Look, as I think David Littleproud said, they're thinking outside the square on this one, and the sentiment around keeping breeding stock alive is sound, is reasonable.
So it's quite a sort of targeted policy, because this doesn't mean, hey, we're going to see lush green farms all along the Murray, but enough to grow fodder for that breeding. That's quite a targeted sort of strategy.
It certainly is, and what we need to understand is the implications of that, because the detail around how the water's allocated, how much each gets, what the expression of interest arrangement looks like. Minister Littleproud said that there was going to be some sort of expression of interest. How's that monitored and managed? So there's a bit of detail to be seen yet.
Right.
But the sentiment is, as I say, keeping breeding stock alive is plausible and sound.
What we've heard today, does the government yet have a long-term drought strategy? You previously said they don't have.
We're of the view that we can improve on the current arrangements, and how we can improve on that is to have clear roles and responsibilities between Commonwealth, state, local government and, importantly, industry. And so that is very clear around what each part of the
how prepared
government.
You should be, who's going to help you out and when.
That's right.
So that hasn't been detailed as yet.
Well, I mean, arguably, yes, we would say that it's not definitive enough. And the other key part of our policy, Tom, is that we've got review mechanisms in place, so that we've got an annual meeting every 2 years and then every 4 years to see what measures are actually working, what aren't, and how do we adjust those, ramp up the ones that are, reduce the ones that aren't. So it is a real-time mechanism and forum to actually
and so it gets the focus when it's not just in drought. Right, so that if things are going well, there's still a constant focus.
That's right, and so you're not doing drought policy in drought.
But doesn't that mean the government's still not thinking long-term enough in your view?
Well, they have argued that they have a national drought agreement and a national drought strategy. What we've put forward is to enhance and complement that. We think we need to go a little bit further around identifying the roles and responsibilities and, importantly, the accountabilities. And that's what we've put forward, and that's what we want them to take up. Not
so long ago, you said the government didn't have a long-term drought strategy. How far have they alleviated that issue in your view?
Well, again, our view is that it needs to be improved.
And what's their message when you say that? Because we kept hearing from the PM that you've had a lot of input into various policies, and they're still not sort of fleshing out the details.
Well, they definitely have their long-term, the $100 million a year, $5 billion that they've put on the table. That hasn't been done before. So that is a long-term drought pool of resources.
But that was already in place when when you made the comment about the drought strategy.
Yeah, so what we've been saying is how do we get a forum, a structure, a system to actually work towards and utilise that resource
Which
base.
they're still working on, so you're hopeful that that's coming?
We're definitely still working on them. You know, this isn't over and you know, the drought has got a long time to go yet.
I wanted to ask you finally about African swine flu. This is a huge issue around the world, and it's not in Australia yet, but there's a lot of alarm, and it would be a massive blow, another one, if it did come here. Are you confident the government's doing everything it can to avoid it entering Australia?
We think so. We hope so. We really, you know, it's a little bit of an unknown. We know how close this African swine fever is, and then we know how devastating it will be if it gets into the country. We've been talking to them really closely. I know Minister Mackenzie has been quite active in putting in place measures that will try and prevent it.
What's the most likely way it would get here? Is it an animal or a product? Because we know there's a lot of strange products that come in, frankly, through the airports.
Sadly, they seem to be increasing, and luckily, you know, we've picked up a couple of. In fact, this week I think there was another person that was deported for importing products that possibly, you know, could have contained this virus. So I feel like the government's on it. They need to continue allocating resources to it, because if this does come to Australia, then that'll be devastating.
Tony Mahar from the National Farmers Federation, you've been in here a lot in the studio lately, but always good to get your thoughts on this ongoing drought. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.